know, about 3/4 of you. It is what we call heart disease. Now, there's many kinds of heart diseases or problems with the heart, but what we mean usually when we say to each other, he or she has heart disease, or he or she had a heart attack, we're talking about coronary artery disease, or CAD. And now my picture has gone off. This is quite remarkable. It was on there for a moment. Oh, is it up there now?
Heart disease and cancer.
Oh, okay. I'm going to... Is there any way you can make it work on the back? Back there in the control room? I'll have to stand aside and look with you at the one up there for now. Oh, it's up there now. Okay. Coronary artery disease kills twice as many men as women 50 years ago. But women have caught up with men and are dying at just as high a rate as are men in the United States of America. Interestingly enough, in the poor countries, guess what? Not so much. Although the poor countries where we have worked a great deal, particularly in the islands, they quit growing their own gardens and started eating like who, do you suppose? Like Americans. Their favorite food is fried chicken. And we have been to the Caribbean 21 times to hold reversing diabetes programs because the highest incidence of diabetes anywhere in the world is in the Caribbean. And of course, somebody has to go there and do it, right? In any case, these diseases that we have are not caused by germs. Most of what's killing Americans, even besides heart disease, not caused by a germ. So we call them diseases of influence. Cancer is the number 2 killer. We'll look at that tomorrow evening. I think you'll be fascinated with the things that can be done to prevent cancer. High blood pressure, you know, these things are all afflicting Americans. And not one of them, friends, is caused by a germ or a virus. Isn't that remarkable? It's caused by the way people live. And I don't know what's going on here this evening. Jack, do you have any control over that back screen that is off? There we go. I need to be more patient, don't I? John McDougall. Oh, you can see. I'm looking and I can't see. So, John McDougall. Is it off at the back at times too? Okay. Well, we'll work together on this thing. Somebody doesn't want you to know. In my opinion, John McDougall, along with about 20 other physicians and health providers, I could name a number of them, names you might not be familiar with, but they all would agree with this, that 100% of heart disease is preventable. This is amazing. I'm talking about coronary artery disease. And of course, this evening, I want to show you what that is, but I'd like to give you the background and so forth. Interestingly enough, once you get it, you can make it go away. Not with pills, but with, guess what? Lifestyle. And I'll show you all about that. This is how many people die every day from coronary artery disease. About 350 people per airplane. 6 of them full every day. I wish you all would have gasped. If a 747 went down somewhere in this country and everybody tragically lost their lives, would that be a big deal in the news? Would they talk about it for days? What if another one went down the next day somewhere else in this country? What do you suppose the FAA would do, the Federal Aviation Administration? They would ground all the 747s. Big deal. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's tragic. But imagine 6 of these full every day from a disease that's completely preventable and, in fact, reversible if one finds out they have it. Astonishing, friends. Just astonishing. Well, many kinds of heart diseases I mentioned, but it's CAD. And everybody knows, I say that. I'd be interested to know how many of you would say, yes, I kind of know that saturated fat is especially bad for your heart. How many? Let me see your hands. A few are not raising their hand, and that's fine. But you know it now, right? And I'll explain why that is briefly. Americans believe then, follow me on this logic, if saturated fat is bad for your heart, then it must be that unsaturated fat would be good for your heart. How many of you have ever heard that? Can I see your hands? Not too many. By the way, if you have some fat in your kitchen along the shelves, how would you know which is saturated and which is unsaturated, other than reading the label? It's easy. If it's liquid, it's unsaturated. Now, it depends, friends, on the percentage. There's in almost any fat you buy, like the oils, there'll be a little bit of saturated fat, more or less. But when the fat that is purchased, like lard, Crisco, butter, etc., these are largely saturated fats, and usually, when I say largely, very high figures. It's not true that the unsaturated fats are good for you. Doesn't every American know that olive oil is good for you? Say yes. That's false. And I'm going to explain why, of course. And somebody said, oh no. But you'll see the whole picture as we go along. So the first study that was ever done to test this thing I've just been talking about, saturated, unsaturated, in terms of heart disease, was actually done in Finland at 2 hospitals that the patients there were long-term. It was actually mental hospitals, and they used these to, I'm just going to put the first letter of the hospital's name, to do an experiment. And these are the death rates in these 2 hospitals from heart disease per 100,000 persons each year. Pretty close to the same figure, 13 and 15, a little higher, but kind of in the same ballpark. And so they made, guess what they did to see if they could change the amount of people dying from heart disease. What did they do? They changed their, talk to me, changed their diet. And this is what they did. They replaced their milk. Let me back that up. They replaced their milk with something scientists call filled milk. And what they mean is they take the animal fat all out of the milk, which is what? Saturated or unsaturated? Mostly saturated. And they replace it with soy oil, which is what? Almost completely unsaturated. A little bit of saturated fat, but not much. And they gave them margarine instead of butter. Now, you all know that margarine is bad for you, right? Does anybody know why it's bad? Can somebody tell me? You're afraid to raise your hand. Well, it's because of what we call trans fats. You've all heard the term, right? It's only been around for a few years, maybe 15, 20 years. But it turns out that trans fat is just a little bit worse than saturated fat. But Americans, hearing that margarine has trans fats in it, what do then? They go back to butter, which is really bad as well. So, that's the challenge. Now, at the end of 7 years, the amount of cholesterol found in the blood had decreased by 19%. Is that very much? Don't you all understand that when the cholesterol is high in the blood, especially what we call LDL cholesterol, that people are at more risk for heart disease, correct? You all know that. So you might say, well, that's not much, 20%, approximately 19. But look what happened to the death rate from coronary artery disease. How much did it drop? Whoa! You mean to tell me, if you just got people to eat margarine instead of butter, and if you could just get these people to make one other tiny change, buy milk that had the fat taken out and soy oil put in, how much would the death rates decrease in this country from coronary artery disease? Over half. Is that a big deal? And it's quite a bit over half, isn't it? 56%. And these studies were done 50 years ago, 1976. That's how long the scientific community has known that if you eat less saturated fat, even if you replace it with unsaturated fat, you're still getting the same amount of fat. Are y'all with me on that? Y'all with me there? You get this incredible reduction in death from heart disease. Now, here's what Dr. Terpinen wrote in, it was a big long paper, we call it. You know, they publish in the scientific journals, but this is kind of the summary. We feel the findings of our study justify the conclusion that in men, whoops, I bet nobody in this room has probably ever heard of this study, am I right? And probably you, of course, didn't hear that it didn't work for women, only men. But the whole world is told that everybody should use olive oil. Is that right? And in fact, it didn't help the women. Interesting. Are we kind of uninformed as Americans? It's amazing to me. And he goes on to say something very interesting. The data, I'm going to use a word that he didn't print, the data also indicate that total mortality was favorably affected. You know what I mean by total mortality? Let me just illustrate it on the screen. Let's just say these are all the things that cause people to die. And if we stack those all up there, we would get what we call total mortality. You might draw a single color for it. But that's what he's talking about, total mortality. Now let me go back there. And we feel the findings of our study justify the conclusion that in men at least, this cholesterol-lowering diet considerably reduced the mortality from coronary heart disease. And then he says, though not conclusively. What does that mean?
All causes of death?
No, we're talking the coronary artery disease. Is one of these ladies here, Mrs.? Mrs. If he said to you, I love you, dear, though not conclusively, would he be in trouble? This is crazy, friends. What it means is the data were so close on this question that you really couldn't draw a conclusion. Are you all with me on this? This is crazy. Because, follow me now, this is a big deal. I'll bet you'd have to ask 1,000 people on the street before somebody would say, yeah, I know about that. You give people unsaturated fat and there's less heart disease. But listen to this now. The overall death rate is unchanged. This study was done 50 plus years ago. Several studies have been done since then. They all show the same thing. Would anybody like to guess what is causing then all those extra deaths when people didn't die of heart disease? Cancer. Is that something important to know? It's amazing, friends, how uninformed we Americans are. The oils, this is going to kill you. No, no, no. This is going to amaze you. The oils cause cancer. That's what the study shows, doesn't it? Right? The oils. I'll tell you why. Let me tell you why. As soon as you take the oil out of a nut or any plant, do you know this, that every single plant has oil in it? Did you know that? Lettuce, oranges, bananas, nuts, all the plants, friend, have oils. Now, 4 of them are high in fats. 4 categories. You know what they are? Olives, avocados, nuts, and seeds. But all the plants have fat in them. When you eat the plant, that oil doesn't cause a problem. When you take the oil out of the plant, it starts oxidizing. Anybody in here a chemist by trade, by any chance? Not a soul? Some of you know a lot about chemistry. The oil oxidizes and it becomes a free radical. You all know that word, don't you? Good or bad? Bad. Among other things, the free radical causes cancer. The oils, folks, that we eat oxidize as soon as they're taken out of the plant and become carcinogens. Is cancer a big issue in this country? Sure it is. Almost as many deaths as heart disease. And the Americans are unaware. It's crazy, friends, crazy. The study was repeated, as I say, repeated in Los Angeles in a veterans domicile where veterans eat there. And they control pretty well not eating outside. Same results, exactly same results. About half as much death from heart disease. Overall death rate, what? Unchanged. Because of what? Cancer. All right. Let's carry on here. You can see the increase in cancer on that diagram. Replacement studies conducted in Finland and Los Angeles showed approximately 50% decrease in death from heart disease, but the overall death rate is unchanged. And if some of you are interested, I have references for everything I tell you if you're interested in getting into the scientific literature and reading about it. Now let me put this for you a little different way. Let's suppose that this bar I've got here measures how much fat Americans are eating. What do you suppose the S stands for? Sure. And the U? And so here's how much fat. I didn't even put a scale on there, but just get the picture. Americans are eating. And quite a bit of it is saturated in comparison to unsaturated. This is what the study showed. That if you have more oil and less saturated fat, you get less what? Less heart disease death. And of course the yellow is the same. It's unsaturated. The red is standing for saturated. So if you decrease, you get less heart disease. But tragically enough, there's another problem. And this is with the same amount of total fat taken in. Now, this is what Americans thought they were supposed to do. Olive oil or whatever kind of oil is good for you. So eat it freely. Do you know what, folks? The Americans are worse off than they were before. Are you all with me on this? It's incredible what is happening to us as a people. Now, I put that 40% there, not terribly important, but that's the percent of the calories that Americans eat that are coming from, guess what? From fat. So about half of our calories, pretty close to half of our calories are coming from fat, of course, which has got its other problems. I'll just throw this in. There's only 3 things that give us calories: fat, carbohydrate, and protein. And the problem is that the fat per pound, per whatever, is twice as many calories, more than twice as many calories as either carbohydrate or protein. So do you know what percentage of Americans are overweight? And it's because we're getting too many calories. Sometimes we'd like somebody to say to us, oh, it's because of this or that. But folks, it's because we're getting too many calories. And it's a tough row because listen, does fat taste good? Yeah. Do you like to fry potatoes in fat? Do people like to fry lots of things in fat, you know? Yeah, it tastes good. No question about that. Oops, I wasn't even watching. Do you remember? Oh, it's got to be 25 years ago that Americans learned that walnuts were good for your heart. How many remember that? Can I see your hands? Not too many. You've all heard it now. And the man who did the study, the scientific study, is a friend of mine. And he gave people a handful of walnuts a day. Now, big people had bigger hands. Small people had... So they kind of got the same dose. You understand what I'm saying? Real simple. And I was present when he gave the lecture telling about his studies. And at the end of the lecture, almost always in a scientific meeting, there's time for Q&A. And I had the nerve, there were 300 people there. I had the nerve to jump to my feet, and he acknowledged me, and I said, and I'll explain this, were these replacement studies? And he said, oh, yes. He never mentioned it in the lecture, interestingly enough. I want to ask you, what do you suppose he meant by that? But I'll just tell you. However much fat was in that handful of nuts, he took that much fat out of their diet and replaced it with the same amount of fats from nuts. Are y'all with me on that? Replacement. And because the average American is eating a fair amount of fat, and quite a bit of it is saturated. Tell me what you think about the fat in those nuts. Saturated or unsaturated by and large? Unsaturated. A little bit of saturated fat, but not much. Mostly saturated, unsaturated. So what you're doing is you're replacing, even though it's the same amount of fat, you're replacing some saturated fat with some unsaturated fat. Y'all with me on that? In fact, the amount of saturated fat in most plants is very low, with only one or two exceptions. The fat, and every plant has fat, right? And these four categories have a lot of fat. Is that correct? But it's almost all unsaturated. So you could do this with other kinds of fat. He used nuts. And I can't remember how many of you raised your hands. How many of you remember that there was this thing about nuts being good for your heart? Can I see your hands just for interest? Not too many. Okay, that's what maybe I kind of remembered. And now, I'll have to look around here. It's getting trickier all the time. It's not even in the back. This is what he did. What was done by this group, I should say. This red bar represents how many people are dying from heart disease as in America right now. We'll just call it 100%. And the people that got nuts less than once a week had just as much heart disease. But the people that got nuts up to 4 times a week, handful of nuts, look how much the death decreased from heart disease. Is that a big deal? And if they had a handful every day, it got even better. Tell me what you think that number is, the green bar. It's maybe 41 or 2, something like that. So we're talking about almost a 60, listen to this, friends, almost a 60% decrease in heart disease just because they ate a handful of nuts every day. Is that a big deal? A very big deal. Now, whether you're a vegetarian or not, you don't get quite as good an effect, but pretty good, wouldn't you say? Right? And even people who don't exercise get some benefit. Are y'all with me? Although a lot more benefit if they're getting some exercise. Even if people are normal weight, about the same. And even people that are overweight get a benefit. Isn't that nice? And again, what about somebody that's, I'm sorry, I thought there were more pictures to show. But this is what Americans were doing. Doctor, should I eat the diet before or after meals? And in this case, what was the diet? A handful of nuts, all right? And actually, you actually could be worse off than the people before, than you were before. Because could you get too much fat by eating too many nuts? Say yes. Sure. Would be unwise. And so, here are Americans. In fact, one day I was asked to give a lecture at a hospital on this topic. And I was sitting there in this big room, and the people were coming in, and I'm listening to them talking. And a lot of them were nurses, and most of them were women, and they're talking about, and they're all talking about how they love to use olive oil on everything. And I'm thinking, boy, I'm in trouble here in what I'm going to tell them, see. But you talk to any credible nutritionist, folks, they all know this. And how many people would you have to ask on the street some kind of a question about this that they would know what I'm talking about? It's amazing, friends. We're not teaching this to our kids in schools. Should we be? Of course we should. It's astonishing. All right. I'd love to have you see. I'm struggling with time. Maybe I'll try to do this quickly. I want to show you why saturated fat. Maybe what I'm going to do, I'm not going to show you why. I'm just going to say saturated fat causes your body to make more cholesterol in the form of bile. And the bile gets absorbed unless you're on a plant regimen, and that absorbed extra cholesterol that you may not know this. Bile is pure cholesterol except for water. You all know the word bile, don't you? Your body makes bile to help digestion. And when the average American, because of the way they're living, all that cholesterol that their body makes to help digest the fat gets absorbed into the bloodstream. What would that do to the amount of cholesterol found in your bloodstream? Increase it. So I'd like to take 10 minutes to explain that whole thing, but because I'm struggling for time, I'm just going to go on with this issue. By the way, please listen. I am extremely comfortable for you to stop me and ask a question if something isn't clear. And you all know this. There are no dumb questions. If you have a question, probably somebody else in the room has the same question. Is that correct? So please stop me. I'm an old teacher, folks. I'm very comfortable. Just raise your hand and we'll take a minute to hear the question, and maybe I can answer it. So, I'm just going to run through this. The liver makes bile. It doesn't digest fat. It just helps digest fat. And the bile is in your body. This is the main point. Your body makes more bile when the fat is what? Saturated. And bile is pure cholesterol virtually. So in most Americans, the bile is reabsorbed. On a proper diet, listen to this, on a proper diet, the bile will not be absorbed into the bloodstream. Got that? Pretty interesting. So we see more heart disease. And people who consume nuts, this is another study, had a big decrease in heart disease. Even just plain fruit, whether it's dried or not, you get less lung, prostate, and pancreatic cancer. So it's not just heart disease. That's our main topic, however, this evening. Can you believe that it's now about 55 years ago, the Surgeon General said that he believed we did not have the data, but just his knowledge and just looking at the whole situation, he believed that we could cut almost all of heart disease. Today we have the data, as I was telling you. It's virtually preventable. It's not caused by a germ, and I shouldn't have pressed the button quite so quickly. It's the way we're living is causing this. Now let me show you something absolutely fascinating. Who in here had a question in their mind that they were kind of afraid to raise their hand? Can I see your hands? Not a soul, please.
When you're talking about the walnut being a nut that is good, how many other nuts in the nut family?
Oh, good question. What about other nuts? All of them. You can use any nut. Even peanuts, which are not nuts, they're legumes, but their nutritional profile is like a nut, so we call them peanuts.
Does that include
Salted nuts? Yeah, I'd love to take time on salt and give you the whole background, but I'll tell you this. Salt is not the issue. Every American thinks that salt is bad for you. That's false. If you completely cut the salt out of your diet, you would die. Are you all with me on that? You take an American who has hypertension and you put them on a low salt diet, maybe their blood pressure will drop by 5 points. But you put them on a proper diet and their blood pressure will become normal. So leaving salt out is at best a little bit of a crutch. And we need salt. You need a minimum of 2 grams of salt a day. Now, Americans get that. But like I say, you die if you don't have salt. Oh, if you're not going to use all these oils, what are you going to do? That's my wife's department. She's the author of 3 cookbooks. We have been teaching these kinds of things we've been married for 57 years, and it's about 2 years after we were married that I finished graduate school in nutrition and learned all this stuff. That far back, people knew this, and you were taught that if you went to school. But what I'm going to show you now is so fascinating. I just love this. This is a drawing of an artery, and it's cut off so you can sort of see inside. There's a layer of muscle on the outside. These things all have names. They're not important for you and me. There's another layer of muscle, and then there's a lining. And the artist has painted them slightly different, so you just get the picture. The lining is a very special lining, just 1 cell thick inside of your artery. And when plaque forms, you all know the term, don't you? P-L-A-Q-U-E, plaque. It does not form inside the artery. It forms under the lining. And I'll accidentally use the name of it, so I'll just tell you. That lining is called intima. And it is endothelial tissue, but the lining in the artery we call intima. And what happens is that about 2 years ago, scientists, at first accidentally and then on purpose, were doing angiograms under study conditions while people had a heart attack. You all with me on this? You all know what an angiogram is. They take x-ray pictures just quickly and every second or so, and they can see what's happening in there. And if there's plaque, it's like they slapped their foreheads and said, why didn't we see this before? Because here's the story, friends. 99% of heart attacks occur because the lining becomes unhealthy. The artist has tried to picture that. It's not the best job, but he's sort of drawn it kind of broken up. You understand what I'm trying to point out? It doesn't get broken up quite like that, but it becomes so unhealthy that the plaque, the cholesterol plaque underneath, oozes through this compromised lining. Are you all with me? And as soon as that material gets inside the bloodstream, it causes a clot to form like in several seconds. Nobody understood this until this was seen. That's why I say they slapped their heads and why didn't we see this before? Because what's going on here, friends, is that it's the health of the lining of the artery. Did I tell you what percent of heart attacks occur like this? 99%. Follow me carefully. Only 1% of heart attacks occur because the plaque filled the whole artery. This is why people die, friends, when they're 32, 41, 52, right? They drop dead. Nobody had an idea. And by the way, this plaque that forms, that the artist has colored yellow, is mushy stuff to begin with. If it wasn't mushy, it couldn't squeeze through the poor, sick lining and cause a heart attack. So the body is desperately trying to harden all of this soft plaque. Are y'all with me on that? And what do we call it then? Hardening of the arteries. That's the body's ability to try to protect you from a heart attack. It is the soft plaque, folks, that's dangerous. And there are many people in this room, unknown to themselves, who have soft plaque building up under the lining in places in their arteries. Are you all with me on this? It's scary stuff. 1%. And here's another issue. This is so powerful, friends. Anybody in this room that has soft plaque, and let's say you're on kind of a standard American diet, the SAD, the SAD diet, you can make that plaque safe. When we first learned this, I remember I was lecturing with a physician friend, and he had just heard this, and we were talking about it. And at that time, the thinking was maybe in a month or two you could make the plaque, you could make the lining safe with a good lifestyle. We now know, this is amazing, we've known this for at least 10 years. We now know that the condition of the lining is dynamic. What does that mean? Changing all the time. I'm sorry to tell you this, friends. One lousy meal can make the lining that might be doing pretty well holding this stuff from coming through to suddenly become compromised. And isn't that it? A man drops dead with no symptoms before that. Am I right? It's happening all over the place. You know that. This is why. Do you know that if you go to your physician and he or she gives you a stress test, you know what I'm talking about? You're on a treadmill, and of course, these days, they're very likely to inject something into your bloodstream so they can see better or detect it more easily. Do you know that you have to have a blockage, it's going to be soft plaque, of over 60% before the stress test will pick it up? What does the physician say to the person who just took the stress test and that there was no blockage detected? You're fine, you're in good health. Now, I gave this lecture one time, and a friend of mine, a great gal, just a great gal, a cardiologist, she said, you know, Jim, really it's more like 65%. And it's amazing, friends, what Americans do not know about their bodies and how they're affecting it by the way they choose to live. Any questions on this? Is it clear? Okay. Now we call this atherosclerosis. Athero is a Greek word that means mush, and sclerosis is a Greek word that means hard. So at first it's mushy, and I think you got this. The body, I forget to turn mine off most of the time too. The body is desperately trying to harden this plaque. Why? So it won't rupture and cause a heart attack. Now, Dr. McDougall said heart disease was reversible. Everybody knew that was not true. He didn't say it back then. But Dean Ornish, Dr. Dean Ornish from University of California, San Francisco, became one of these, about a dozen physicians and many others as time goes by, that are getting this picture and trying to help their patients think about changing the way they're living. Dr. Ornish did a study. He took 24 men who had angiographically diagnosed plaque in all three of we say three arteries. There's other arteries and smaller arteries, but we say three coronary arteries. And at random, put them in two groups. You know about that experimental group and the group that's left alone, if you will, the control group. He found that he measured from the x-rays of their arteries how much blockage there was on each little half centimeter of each artery, and averaged it over each person, and then averaged it over the 12 men. And the average blockage was 40% of the artery was closed by what kind of plaque? Well, soft plaque to begin with, and as time goes by, the body is hardening it to try to save the life. And why is no input detected until now? Okay. Everybody knew you could not reverse plaque until Dean Ornish did this. He put them on a special diet for a year. He did 5 things. It wasn't the best science. A whole plant regimen. Do you know what I mean by whole plant? Why don't I just say plant? Because you can make refined plants be very bad for you. Is that correct? You all with me on that? So he put them on a plant-based diet. He had them exercise. He had them under stress control regimen. He had group therapy, and he even did yoga. I'm not into some of that, but that's what he did. Not the best science. Why? He did get a result. There was a decrease in the blockages over these 12 men of 5.5%. Why am I saying it's not the best science? I couldn't hear you. Too many factors. It's wonderful, but you don't know which one did what. That's the idea. Now, since that time, these things have been tested. But I respect this man tremendously for what he did. Because everybody, listen to this. He could not get money from the NIH, which some of you know is kind of a problematic organization, because everybody knew you couldn't reverse arterial disease. This guy raised this money privately. I have tremendous respect for him. He was just going against the stream. But he was the first one that did it. Now the control, you know what I mean by the control group? The people that are pretty much left alone. Except he actually had them do some of those things a little bit. But their plaque increased. I'm sorry about these interruptions. Their plaque increased. This was the average, about the same. You know, this height is about the same as that height. But at the end of the same 12 months, their plaque had increased by 9%. Amazing, friends. This is going on in Americans all the time. Most Americans are not living as well as the second group. You understand what I'm saying? Again, the science is a little bit skewed because he tried to help the control groups to do a little better too. But and by the way, for those of you that are familiar with this kind of thing, there's two scientific journals in the world that are considered absolutely the top of their business. One is published in America, JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and the other one is published in the UK, Lancet. And I just tell you that because these journals do not publish things that are sort of questionable. All right. Now, how many of you have ever heard about the Framingham Heart Study? 1, 2. Okay. Framingham is a town. It's a bedroom community in Boston. And starting now, 60 years ago about, a physician by the name of William Castelli got money, and he enlisted 4,000, I think it was 4,000 men, And they're still following a few of those men that are still living. But they've been following them for all these years. In terms of heart disease. And I know Castelli personally. He gave me these pictures. This is actually an artery in the heart. Cross-section. Do you know what I mean by that? It's like it's coming out of the screen and you can see it. And this is the inside of the artery. You can't see the intima here. This is plaque. This is soft plaque. And that's the rest of the soft plaque. And this is the only place that blood is flowing in this piece of artery. This is not unusual, folks, for people in America. Now, what is the body trying to do? By the way, all of that hard plaque was at one time what? Soft plaque. And the body's doing a pretty good job at changing this soft plaque to hard plaque. Are y'all with me on this? And this is probably 15 to 17%. So this is like an 84% obstruction. Here's another one. Oh, and by the way, I'm sorry. This is not dangerous plaque except for poor circulation. This is so much hard plaque covering this soft plaque. And what percentage of heart attacks are caused by soft plaque breaking through? 99. Virtually all of them. Are y'all with me on that? So the fact that the body has been able to put this bridge of hard plaque over the soft plaque is, you could call it good. Of course, it's bad because of the circulation problem. Now, I'll have to take time to show you these arrows. I'm sorry about that. And then we'll go to the next picture. This particular case, again, here is the outside of the artery wall. There's a fancy name. This is where the blood is flowing. This is the soft plaque. And this looks like a dangerous one. That soft plaque is so close. In fact, can you see the lining there? Y'all with me? You can see the lining in some places. What's it called? Doesn't matter. It's called the intima. This is a dangerous plaque. You can just tell by looking at it. Y'all with me on that? It looks like that could break through there quite easily. And this one killed this man. Again, there's the outside of the artery. Here is hard plaque. In fact, the soft plaque is kind of spread across a lot, about right there. But this is where, and you can see the intima there. This is where the soft plaque broke through, and in seconds this clot formed and killed this man. This is the standard situation that happens. I have to turn around and look because the one in back isn't working very well. Isn't this remarkable? Just amazing. Our bodies are struggling to keep us well. Now, there's plenty of people in this room that have some soft plaque, and probably a number of us that have some hard plaque. And your body is desperately trying to protect you and me. And if I will make some changes, it will really help my body do that. And in fact, get this point. I didn't make this clear enough. It was on the screen, I think. But Dr. Ornish, oh, by the way, let me say this. What do you suppose is the average percentage, actually I put it on the screen, of people's total calories that comes from fat? Remember what that number was? 40%? Close to half of our calories. Are y'all with me on that? In order to get the heart disease to reverse, in order to get the plaque to go away, and by the way, it's not the hard plaque that goes away. We don't know how to remove that yet. You can maybe try it surgically, but you have to get people's fat intake down to 10%. I didn't tell you this. The plant-based regimen that Dr. Ornish gave those people he didn't let them have any of the 4 plants that are high in fat. Y'all with me on that? And he got their fat intake down to 10%. And it wasn't until he got it that low that he could get the plaque to some of it to go away. Now, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, anybody know that name? Good for you, about 10 of you, who wrote the book, How to Reverse Heart Disease. I know him personally. We've talked about these things. He is so strict that he gets the fat intake down to 7%. And you're mainly eating just plain veggies. Because is there fat in every plant? Say yes. Is there different amounts of fat in every plant? So even those that are not high in fat, folks, you can choose some of those that are the lower, and that's what he does. He gives them a very careful program and reverses the heart disease. Now, this is the diet that the American Heart Association recommends. So if you went to your physician, whether he was or she was your family physician or a cardiologist, and they put you on, I see what might be going on. I unconnected the power. It's operating on its battery, which is okay. That's the diet that your doctor puts you on if you're at risk or do have some heart disease. So what does this mean, this little piece of red down here? Almost no saturated fat. I told you at the beginning, and many of you didn't seem to be aware of this, but saturated fat causes the body to make much more plaque than any unsaturated fat, and unsaturated fat hardly ever does that unless it was in such extreme amounts. So that's why he wants it so low. And the total calories from fat are reduced substantially from what Americans are getting. Now, I'm sorry I got ahead of myself. This is the American Heart Association recommendation. Forgive me for confusing you. This is what Dr. Ornish did. Are y'all with me on that? And I'm not even putting on the screen what Dr. Esselstyn did. He took it down to what percentage of fat? 7%. So the interesting thing is, even on the American, this is crazy, friends, on the American Heart Association diet, is your body continuing to make plaque? Say yes. And not until you get the fat intake down to 10% can we show that plaque might reduce some, and even better if down to 7. But your physician, and this I'm not criticizing them. Listen, how many people who go to their physician and they recommend some pretty serious change in people's, not you folks of course, but it's a pretty serious change in somebody's dietary program, how many of them go home and do it? Do you know that I was the administrator in California, some of you know this place, at a program, a big 460-acre property where they bring people in for 18 days that are sick from various kinds of chronic diseases. By the way, I put them on the screen, didn't I, in the beginning, the chronic diseases, some of them? I said they were not caused by a germ. We call them chronic because they're not caused by a germ. They just continually happen while we live poorly, as we do in America. Anyway, I was the administrator there by the request of the owner for 2 years. And people pay $6,500 to come stay there for 18 days. And as the vice president, I met with the new group, and 2.5 weeks later, I met with them for their graduation. It's powerful. These people, after 2.5 weeks on a really good lifestyle of proper eating and activity and so forth, they're just glowing. They have gotten well. They are just enthusiastic. The food is good. Now, my wife's food is even better, but the food at that place, Weimar Institute, is pretty good. And they're going to go home and do this. They know why they got well. Are y'all with me? And how much did they pay? $6,500. Would you like to estimate how many of those people stay on the program long term? 10%. How did you know that? He said 10% and somebody else said it too. Isn't that sad? After paying how much? $6,500. And it breaks my heart, frankly. You get to love people. In 2.5 weeks, when you're with people kind of day and night, your heart is bound up with them. I'll tell you this much, a little quick story. My wife and I, after I retired, now 17 years ago, bought 40 acres up in northeastern Washington State, up near the border. It's cold up there in the winter. I really like it. In Cottonwood in the winter. And we have operated there ever since. Well, it took a little time to get the property ready. We built 3 cottages for our guests and whatever. But anyway, we have operated a 6-day program, just like that Weimar program, for 15 years out of the 17 years we've lived there. And people come. Listen, folks, how many of you are familiar with something called diabetic neuropathy? A bunch of you have heard that. People get numbness, especially in the limbs, feet, lower legs, and a physician, and I'm not blaming them because they're correct, will tell the people the neuropathy will never go away. It will just slowly get worse. But in fact, I'd love to take 15 minutes to tell this story. I'm just going to say it quickly. You can make the neuropathy completely go away with a plant regimen. You know what I'm talking about, right? Eating plant foods. And we had a fellow come to one of our recent ones. He couldn't feel anything from his knees on down. He was overweight. His blood pressure was way up there. It's terrible. I mean, he was a walking time bomb, close to 300, the systolic pressure. And what was else I going to say about him? His blood sugar. He had diabetes. His blood sugar was elevated, way up. And his A1C was commensurate. Most of you kind of know about A1C now these days. His blood pressure and his blood sugar were normal within 5 days without medication. Now, the doctor that's with us, different physicians will come and be with us for that week. They don't just take them off their medication. They work with them day by day, but usually most of them, by the end of the week, are off their medication. You have to watch it carefully, obviously. His blood pressure was normal. His blood sugar was normal without medication, and all his neuropathy had gone away in 5 days. It's amazing, friends, what happens if people will determine to start treating our bodies as best as we're able, and maybe even beyond what we thought we were able to do. Well, if 30% still makes you sicker, and if 10% makes you better, somewhere between you don't get sicker or better. Are y'all with me? And everybody pretty much now in the community of healthcare in this world agrees that if you get people's fat intakes down to 20%, and they're active, these issues pretty much go away. Now, I taught college nutrition for 10 to 11 years. And if the students wanted to, they could eat at Neva's table. You know who Neva is? That's Mrs. Brackett, who's going to do a couple of demonstrations for you and give you some samples in a few minutes. And I had them write down everything they ate and the amounts for a whole month. And part of the final exam was, it's easier on the computer to make these things all give you figures, was they had to turn in the results of those efforts. And over all of those 10 to 11 years, those kids, they were all, well, there was a few older people that came, actually, interestingly enough, into this program and took the courses. Their fat intake fell between 17 and 20%. So if people eat only plants, unrefined, you can get wonderful health as a result. All right. This is Esselstyn. He gave me this in person. He had 98 patients. 177% of them followed the plan, a word you and I don't use that often. And the plan was no dairy, fish, meat, or oils. And Esselstyn is the one who wrote the book, How to Reverse Heart Disease. Y'all with me on this? How many have ever listened to him or watched him on YouTube or on television or anything? A few of you. You know the name. And in the adherent group, only one event took place. And actually, he told me in person, he said, Jim, I really shouldn't have included him because he cheated more than it looks like. But to kind of be totally open to the scientific community, he included this man. Everybody, and by the way, all of these people had been given up by their cardiologists, saying, you know, you just get your house in order. And you may not know this about Esselstyn. He's become so famous for this kind of thing, he can easily get patients from cardiologists in various categories to do these kinds of studies. And of the people who were did not follow the program, 13 of the 21 people who did not follow the program had an adverse event. They either died or had a heart attack or a stroke. Isn't that remarkable? I wish you all would have said yes together, but it's all right. I'm sure you meant that. So the summary is this. If I replace animal fat with plant fat, I can reduce heart disease quite a bit. But the overall death rate doesn't change because of cancer. The nut studies show that if the oil is left in the plant, a decrease of 36% or higher in coronary artery disease is found without an increase in cancer. Isn't this remarkable, friends? Amazing stuff. If the fat intake is reduced to 10% of the total calories, atherosclerosis can be reversed. The American Heart Association recommendation, I'm sorry to say, is only 30%, and people still get sicker at that figure. The plaque ruptures, causing a heart attack, and so forth. Now, I'll close with this interesting story. This is the picture on the front of a book in my library on our immune system. And this is a white blood cell, quite a large cell. You can't see it with your naked eye, but a pretty large white blood cell. And we have given him a special name. Now, this is a photograph taken on a microscope slide, and they put a germ in there, which you can see here. And this white blood cell, some of you will know the name of it. It's called a macrophage. Macro means big, phage means eater. It's as though he eats stuff up that your body's trying to get rid of. And I'm sorry, it looks like this is his left paw, and this is his right paw, and that's his left eye. That's not the case. I wish they'd have taken the picture a few more times until it didn't look like he's crawling around. But he does move. He actually moves. I say he. It moves by oozing. You ever give your grandkids some silly putty and they left it on the table? A little ball of it. What's it look like in the morning? Imagine him just doing that in one direction. Got it? Then he scooches up and does it some more. That's how he travels. He oozes around. He can ooze anywhere. He can ooze right through a blood vessel wall. He can ooze through bone. They travel all over your body, going everywhere. They are the policemen looking for stuff that shouldn't be there. Quite a large, there are many kinds of white blood cells, but this one is quite large and has, we would be dead in days or weeks, friends, without these things patrolling constantly in our bodies. It's an amazing story. In any case, macro means large, phage means eater, and this is our closing several minutes, a drawing of the artery where the artist has pictured the intima. You all with me on that? Please say yes. And then 2 layers of muscle. There's a layer, and then the outer layer. And in a moment, I'm going to put that portion of the picture on the whole screen. And I'm even going to draw the cells, because it's like the magnification is so big, we could tell what's going on. Does that make sense? Can you see that this is the inside curvature of the artery? Y'all with me on that? That I showed you a moment before. And now the magnification is big enough that I can draw cells. And here's what happens as plaque develops. Here's inside the artery. These are the specialized cells that line the artery, different than the muscle cells below them. I wanted to go below. There we go. And so that's the lining cells. And what happens is, for various reasons, damage occurs to these lining cells. For example, cigarette smoke has, I used to say 10,000, that was correct. We now know of over 15,000 poisons in cigarette smoke. And some of those toxins get in the bloodstream. And other things can do this as well. Too much fat, etc., can injure the lining. I'm going to show the injury as a dent. It's not a dent. It's a chemical injury. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Some chemical gets in that cell that causes it to die or to be severely damaged. And I'm going to show it as a dent. Do you see the dent? Okay. To this cell. And what happens is that cell dies and the macrophage comes along and eats it up. And then momentarily, well, hours maybe, these 2 cells communicate with each other chemically, and a decision is made as to which one will copy itself and fix the problem. So now we have a good intima again. Are y'all with me? Well, the problem is this. In your blood and mine are these particles, LDL, HDL, and 16 others. They all have names. Everybody knows about LDL and HDL, but there's a bunch of others. Some of them are different sizes. Some of them have different protein little marks on them, and so forth. But in general, Americans, people everywhere, have too many of these. You know about that. And so the macrophage actually has special receptors. I'd love to take 5 minutes to describe this, but it can make some sense. The macrophage has these things sticking out here and there that can identify those fatty particles and eat them, pull them inside. So while that macrophage is there cleaning up that dead cell, if there's too many of these, he will overfill himself. It will overfill itself, trying to protect your body and mind from all these particles that shouldn't be there. Are you with me on how this is going? The problem is, when there's too many of them in the blood, he gets so full he can no longer move. And it actually dies. Any of you in this room that are nurses, physicians, whatever, in those fields have heard this. They're called foam cells. Anybody ever heard the term? Nurses, physicians, dentists? What do you suppose happens when the macrophage dies there because he got so many of these particles in? Anybody want to take a stab?
The immune system starts to work against it.
Well, he says the immune system starts to work against it. Yes, I'd like a little more detail. I'll just tell you. Other macrophages come along and clean it up. What happens to them while they're cleaning up this dead macrophage? They die also. And watch this. I think this is just fascinating beyond belief almost. It is the accumulation of these foam cells that is the plaque. Got it? You don't look very impressed. I think that's really interesting, don't you? Well, let me ask you. Why are all these foam cells, why are all these macrophages coming there? To clean up the dead macrophages. And while they're there, they ingest, and are y'all with me on this process? And is it conceivable that you could make a change in your lifestyle so that these guys wouldn't keep building up? Please say yes. Amazing, friends. I wish you were more astonished. I think that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Now, this is I'd love to take more time, but I know I should quit now. I'll just say, this is just a drawing trying to illustrate something about a macrophage. This is a macrophage. And he has these things called what? Receptors all over his surface to gather in these fatty particles. Does that make a little sense? Grabs them and pulls them inside. And some of them are more dangerous than others. The most dangerous one we know about is one called LP little a, because it's a whole bunch of LDLs together in one piece. And how quickly does it get into the macrophage? So rapid development of plaque will occur when the LP little a fraction of those particles in your blood is elevated. Did you follow that sentence? Now, they're doing this better in Germany today than we are. The scientific community in Germany is measuring virtually all the particles, all these fatty particles that are in people's blood. You only get 1 or 2 or 3, am I right? You hear about HDL and LDL. I shouldn't do this to you. The lay people are taught LDL is little devil and HDL is heavenly something. The cholesterol in them is the same. There's no such thing as bad cholesterol and good cholesterol. It's all the same. But the particle that carries it is an issue. And lifestyle, friends, changes our bodies to work in just wonderful harmony with this whole situation. And as you know, Dr. Esselstyn says, you can not only stop the heart disease from progressing, you can reverse it. So that's the end. I know you're disappointed that I'm at the end. But now, where's Neva? Rita? Are the people supposed to come back here or go over there? For Neva's not, but is she still over there now? Is she ready to start? Okay. Does she need to be told we're ready for her? Okay, whatever. I could call her, but anyway, I don't see chairs back there. That's what's concerning me. But Neva's going to give you some samples. And she's going to do some PowerPoint. She may do the demonstrations right quick first. They're actually on my computer. It takes a lot longer to do the demonstrations, so she has them on pictures. And I'm going to unplug this so I can see my screen and start her program. And then Any questions? Any further questions? While we're waiting for Neva.
You said olive oil is bad and the other oils are bad. Is there any good one, or what do you replace that with other than the margarine, which isn't
Good for you either. Yeah. Very good question, obviously. The oils, God made them to be in the plants for us to eat. The problem is when you take the oil out of the plant, it oxidizes and then it becomes a carcinogen. A, I didn't tell you this yet. And B, it becomes an inflammatory agent in your body. All of these diseases that Americans are suffering, friends, folks, are chronic diseases, mainly because of inflammation. And of course, the germs that are causing some of these diseases, the chronic inflammation exacerbates the body's efforts to try to control the disease. So Neva has, and we're not trying to sell her book, but she's the author of 3 whole plant books. And do you want to do your on-screen thing first and then go in there and do the samples?
Well, no, we're just going to get them on there.
But you're going to do the demos now or later?
We're going to do them this.
That's what I asked you. You're going to do them now, before they eat. Okay. So when Neva and I married almost 7 years ago, this is not in any way making fun at all. You just need to know this. She'll immediately say yes. She did not know how to cook. Today, and she doesn't like me to say this either, she is known all over the world for making healthy food taste good. Now, a lot of people make healthy food, and a lot of times it's pretty bad. Am I correct?
Yeah. It's like shoe leather.
Or worse. Neva's a very humble lady. She doesn't like me to say this, but I want you to know, folks, if you will put forth the effort, you can make food wonderfully tasteful, and especially if you follow the recipe.
Well, yeah, if I could do it, you can do it.
Yeah. And so let me get her. And dear, the problem is we can't watch it on this screen. You're going to have to look back there, but I'll help you do it. I'm going to get her.
Aren't we using my computer?
No, it's on mine, remember, because yours doesn't have an HDMI connector. Talk to them a minute while I find it, please.
Well, we're going to be doing breakfast kind of things this morning. And
This evening?
I think that, this evening, I don't know, breakfast is usually in the morning, so that threw me off, I guess. But Sunday morning is our time to have waffles. I grew up Sunday morning waffles. And so maybe it's appropriate to do that on Sunday today, even though it's Sunday night. And we're going to give you a little waffle on a plate, just a little quarter of one of our round waffles, and some berry sauce and ice cream. And that way you can kind of get kind of a wide range of things that you can do in many different ways.
Now, sweetheart, it's strange, but we can't see the picture here. So you
Yeah.
have to look back there and press the arrow.
Okay, that's fine. I can do that.
All right.
So let's just start out. I'm going to show you how we make our waffles. And is that the way it's supposed to start?
Yeah.
We weren't going to show
You
the
just tell them
ingredients
how you
first.
make how you blend up the mix.
Okay, well, I meant to show you. I meant to bring this bag of waffle mix. Maybe,
Tomorrow night?
no, I've got it out there in the other room, but you don't have to see it. It's just that I take the recipe that's in the
I'll
cookbook
get it for you.
for waffles
Let me get it for you.
and turn to page 17 in there. And the ingredients in this are very simple and very just whole plant type of ingredients. We use oatmeal to start with, 1 cup of oatmeal, and then about 3 other different grains that goes in with it. There's cornmeal or millet, flaxseed, and then some nuts, raw cashew nuts, or you could use walnuts, just about any nut in there to give it fat. And of course the oats and those other grains have fat in them too, but the nuts really take the place of oil when my mom made waffles when I was growing up, we always, you put eggs in, sometimes even separate the eggs and beat the whites and fold that in, and it just makes them real light and fluffy. And but you don't need to do it that way. You can just do it like this, and they turn out so good and so light and nice. So there's.
Let me just interrupt. You'll think this is an exaggeration. We have fed hundreds of thousands of people these waffles because we had 2 restaurants. One of them was open for 10 years in Seattle. And every Sunday brunch from 10 to 2 featured waffles with ice cream. Healthy ice cream, obviously. Go ahead, dear.
But we also had muffins and granola.
But carry on with the story here.
Anyway.
Press the button and show them.
Good thing I've got him to keep me going, or we'd be here
I
all
went
night,
over time.
right?
You can't do that.
Okay. So I'll show you the waffles after we blend them.
Let it play. It's pretty runny. That's just fine.
Let me say it.
Go ahead, dear.
The mix is, you might expect it to be thicker than that, but if you get it too thick, they will be heavy. So if your waffles turn out a little bit too heavy, then the next waffle, add a little water to the mix, blend it, and it will be lighter.
Then when it's done, you wait till the steam stops.
What's the 1 raisin for?
Well, actually, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that because the recipe doesn't say that. In the cookbook, it says to put in 1 tablespoon of concentrated apple juice. And that, turns out to be a little bit of a pain sometimes to go to the freezer, get a little bit of apple juice concentrate, to making apple juice with. So I took to doing maybe a date, but a date is too much. The purpose of it is to help it to turn a little bit brown when it bakes. Because or it could be just a little bit of honey, a little bit of maple syrup.
The easiest thing is just 1 raisin.
Yeah, so I keep the raisins, I keep a little container of raisins right there handy, and where I have, in fact, what I do is I mix up, and in the back of the cookbook there's some recipes for making handy mixes. So the efficiency tips, how to do things easier and faster. And I mix up all the dry ingredients. It's about 8 times the recipe that gives you a large recipe in the back of the book. All the dry ingredients, I mix them all up, put them in a gallon jar. I've got a row of gallon jars up on my shelf.
With different things
in it. And there's my waffle mix. And I put 2 cups of water in my blender, 1.5 cups of that mix, and 1 raisin, maybe 2, depends how big your raisins are, how dark you want your mix, and a little salt, which I don't keep in there because sometimes it sifts around and doesn't
So
get
the
right
raisin
out.
and the salt we always add with this big jar. We take 1.5 cups of that mix, 2 cups of water, 1 raisin, and salt. Because the salt can sift down as the thing sits around, so we add the salt and the raisin.
So then you just blend it, and when it's blended, pour it into your waffle iron. And my daughter keeps a waffle iron right by her toaster, and it's if you don't even have bread, and you have your waffle mix, you can make a waffle, and you can use them even for sandwiches. As a lunch thing. Today we had wonderful cooked beans, like pinto beans. They were just so softly cooked and nice and perfect. And we put that over some toast. But sometimes we'll put something like that on a waffle or avocado, So anyway, very versatile.
A quick word. We don't use any oil on the waffle iron. And that will only work if you buy a new waffle iron. It might work without that, but we buy a new waffle iron, never wash it. Please underline those 2 words. Never wash it. Brush out the crumbs if you want, and that's all you need to do. Of course, we're talking Teflon. You understand that. And
all the waffle irons now are nonstick surface.
It's just so amazing. You saw how easy that waffle came out. No, you never put any grease on that waffle iron.
That ice cream doesn't have any dairy or...
No, the ice cream is made from plants.
And we'll show you
get to
that. That's
yeah.
next here, just about. Why doesn't that
Do
start?
you have to look up there
Oh,
because
that's
remember,
why.
it's
Yeah, so that waffle is like what we're going to serve you.
it's amazing how that waffle comes out of there. Never any grease or oil on it ever. It's amazing. And I'm telling you folks, we've done this thousands and thousands of times.
So I love berries on waffles, and we have berries in our garden, and so we're very blessed that way in the summertime. I don't bother with making this sauce. Sometimes we'll just have our fresh raspberries on the table with some maybe blueberries, and of course you can get those in the grocery store. You can go to Fry's and get them, but
Almost any fruit, right?
yeah,
If you wanted.
peaches. But anyway, I'll just, instead of making a sauce, I put just a little bit of maple syrup and the berries. So they're not sweetened, but the syrup sweetens them a little bit, and so does the ice cream. And of course, it depends on your condition as far as diabetes or whatever, but we'll talk about that later, I guess. Okay. Now we'll go to the next one.
Just an illustration. By the way, those were deep waffles. Did you notice that? You can use a deep. Go back one arrow. See that?
What do you mean, deep waffles?
The holes are deep.
Oh, Belgian waffles.
Yeah. That works well,
Yeah, you can
amazingly enough.
do it with Belgian.
Even with that runny mix we put in there.
Okay, did you recognize those?
Yeah.
These are persimmons, which I never had heard of a persimmon hardly till I met Jim. And when I first went with him to his house in Northern California, he introduced me to persimmons, and he's crazy about them. I didn't really like them that well at first, but
He had to learn to like them.
He just kept going on and on about how wonderful they were until I finally agreed. And now, look what we do with them. I mean, we get lots of them and freeze them. And so we have those to put
On the waffle.
On a waffle.
And we always have ice cream with the waffle, and we'll show. You're going to show them how to make the ice cream today or later?
Yes. Yes, today. So anyway, there's the ingredients. I use coconut milk, and the one you tasted that you'll taste tonight, but you can use soy milk or almond milk or something else like that in the
And
recipe.
here's making the ice cream, right?
Right. So, and then another ingredient that really helps is xanthan gum or guar gum.
In the ice cream.
Yes, that's usually in ice creams that you buy. It's a perfectly natural ingredient. I mean, I don't know, I guess they do have to refine it out of the
Plant.
But so you just use a little bit, a half teaspoon. Actually, lately I've been using a whole teaspoon if you make a very large amount of ice cream,
So
which is
here's-
a pretty large amount when you have a Vitamix. But if you have a smaller blender, you can do it in that, especially if it's a high-powered one. I'm going to show you my brand new purchase of a Ninja that I just got. It costs
Much cheaper.
about $100. The Vitamix is about $400. So, and it works really well. So you might like to
Anyway, this is
consider
instant
that.
ice cream. What's there is the mix, the coconut milk and the other ingredients, and then you add ice.
Right.
Show them.
First you blend up all that creamy part, and then we'll do this little video here.
It'll come. I think you have to press the arrow to make it start. Well, we've got 1 cup of coconut milk, a half a cup of cashews, a half a cup of dates, a heaping teaspoon of salt, a scant half teaspoon of guar gum. Sorry you couldn't hear that. It was the ingredients. They're in the book.
Ice. Okay, you blended
Fill it with ice
until it was smooth.
to the top
Blend ice into it.
after you've had the coconut milk and the cashew nuts and a couple of things. And I stirred this way longer than you need to, just a few seconds, and the ice is all.
No, I
Done.
blend it as long as I dare because
I said stir, not blend. I
Oh,
stirred this
okay.
more than it needed to be stirred just to make sure the ice got blended, but it would get blended quicker. the ice would. Now we put that in the freezer. It gets real hard because it's so low in fat. So all you have to do is take it out and let it become thawed enough to where it's just like regular ice cream. Right there, it's a little bit runny because
it looks like it has a few pieces in it. We may have put some cherries. Sometimes I put fresh cherries in it or frozen strawberries, just to give it a little extra flavor. And of course you can do that, peaches. Now we're putting it in a container.
we freeze it in those containers. We usually use the shorter ones.
And here's another example, making persimmons on waffles and with peanut butter. We're trying to gain weight. You might not want to do that if you're trying to lose weight. But okay, that's for tomorrow.
That one is. Okay. So you're going to give them a little piece of waffle with a little ice cream on it?
Yes.
Or a little ice cream to eat with it.
And we're also going to give you a little sample of the granola. And that recipe we're not showing you, but you can look it up on my Facebook page.
All of these recipes are demonstrated on our Facebook page.
Neva's Kitchen 7 Secrets. Is there a dash in there? Neva's. Anyway, just write in if you turn to Facebook or in Google. Neva's Kitchen 7 Secrets. And
we had ordered some cookbooks. They're not here yet. If you want some, they might be here in the next day or two. We hope.
Okay. Well, let's go to the back.
Let's go back there.
Now, what you have, we've got our little ingredients in separate little cups, and you can just squeeze the berry sauce onto your little waffle if you want, and the ice cream. There's granola. You can even sprinkle that on there and just eat the whole thing, or take it home and eat them all separate. I don't know. We just wanted you to be able to see all the ingredients separate, and then put it on the plate if you want, and have it now or take it home and eat it later.
Tomorrow night, I'm going to deal with the issue of dementia and why so many Americans are getting it and what you and I can do to prevent it. It'll be very fascinating stuff. I hope you'll bring some other folks with you. But thank you for coming.